at the time that it was important to stress that this was a strategy developed for the people of Plymouth, by the people of Plymouth. So it wasn't one organisation, or two or three organisations coming together from the top down. It was very much bottom up in terms of this is by the people of Plymouth, representing all these groups that were involved. And there was a stakeholder conference, and the draft plan came out of that. We looked at the whole life needs of people and how those whole life needs were being met at present in Plymouth and by which organisation, or if they were not being met and who should be doing it. Either the groups are represented or need to think of some other way of meeting some of these whole life. I think there were 15 or 16 life domains that we looked at. And the strategy was developed every time it went back to the original group to test it out, and it was launched in 2012. I've got a copy of it somewhere, and now it's adopted by the commissioners of Devon and of Plymouth, and also by the health service or social services, and also by each of the community groups that represent the network. And we've now been working in terms of implementing some of the things that were seen as priorities and all that might be taken. So it's an organic process built on the funded principles of developing relationships between each other and understanding what the actual whole life, the whole system that needs to do to meet the whole life needs of people. So that was just a brief illustration of that. Thanks.
I think sorry?
Sorry, I was going to ask a question. The focus seems to be on those people that still have a degree of self-awareness or self-determination, and that they can recognise that they are in a different place than where they want to be, rather than people who are totally beyond help. Or are you looking at the whole programme to suit the whole swing of people?
No, I mean, people may not, first of all, want to determine their own future because of their circumstances, because of their, their mental health problem. That doesn't mean to say they're not included, because people do begin to see. And if you start with people's life stories and engage with them in a very, that sort of relationship, everybody wants to improve their life, in fact, regardless of the degree of disability, as I've said already. Everybody has the potential to start this recovery journey. And there's lots of evidence, Paul will talk about that later, there's lots of evidence with people who are with very serious, complex problems have actually changed and developed and grown and actually been able to overcome their difficulties, and now they're very successful. They still have symptoms.
Yeah.
A lot of them still have symptoms, particularly people who are with psychosis. A lot of people still have symptoms, but they develop coping strategies.
Yeah. So the organisation is looking for an improvement in the lives of people who are...
No, the organisation, that's the wrong way of looking at it. The organisation is not. The people are looking for improvements in their lives.
That must be the trigger that causes somebody to reach out and look for help.
Yeah.
The fact that they want to change.
They want to
Yeah,
change.
yeah, of course.
But I wondered how wide a scope you had with the people who do suffer mental health.
The people in Plymouth, it's everybody. Everybody with a mental health problem is included.
Yeah,
And the same in other places.
I mean, there are people whose lives are so chaotic and whose distress is so overwhelming. It may be that at that time in their life it's not possible, but you hold the hope that there will be. And what you do is you always get involved in engaging with them, so that even if now things look overwhelming, we look forward to the time when we can work with you. In
so that engagement could trigger
it can in itself.
Something, yeah.
It's about expectation as well.
Yeah.
You're actually saying, you can do this.
Yes.
And
But
that's
also, you know, introducing to them to people that have actually done it
Yes.
is important.
With lots of examples of people we've worked with and other organisations that have been categorised in this horrible category called severely enduring and to a great extent been written off. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And there's loads of evidence that if you engage with people in a different way and you have different expectations of people, that they can embark on this recovery.
You can introduce
And it's about
Yeah.
instead of trying to suppress some of the person's experiences, and this is a bit of a generalisation, but about not just about suppressing people's experiences, but enabling people to learn different ways of living with those experiences and not seeing them as something that's preventing them from actually living a life. And
Yes.
lots and loads and loads, there's lots of research, a very good book's just been published, very, very good book around a different way of looking at psychiatry, schizophrenia and psychosis. Excellent piece of work. It's about actually how you engage with people and not having the same expectations. Because if you have an expectation of a person that they're always going to be dependent on you, they're going to there's potential that they're always going to be dependent on you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's what I was illustrating with the lady I was talking about. She's in a trap.
Yeah.
She's been trapped, if you like, by the system, and she's struggling to make her way out of that system.
One of the things the two stories that have been told so far, the key to it is the quality of the relationship and trust that's formed between the two people who are talking with each other.
Absolutely.
And there's that opportunity to tell your story the way you want to tell the story. The problem is in assessment protocols and models, you often try to tick boxes, so you're guiding the story towards a particular kind of diagnosis. When you just say, just tell your story,
Tell your story.
as long as it takes you to tell it,
Yes.
then with the focus on strengths and what happened, we also begin to realise how many people in their life have experienced trauma and distress in childhood or in young life, and how important that can be as well. There's no mistake, for instance, that people who are in our psychiatric services, a lot of them in social services care. There are associations and relationships, so if you know somebody's whole life, you can begin to work out how you can resolve that.
And the environment is important too, it doesn't have to be...
But at a particular time, there are people who actually don't want to recover, or don't want to, it's their choice.
And it's also, I think the other thing is like with the well-being concept as well, is that there's a lot of people, and psychiatry knows this, who are, for instance, the term schizotypic, for an example, who aren't actually in the service or known to the service, but experience the same kinds of phenomenon, and are living in our community right now, and that's right across the board. So, who are living, maybe suffering and having issues, but they're there. They're not. So, in a sense, the well-being concept allows for these people to be supported before they go into crisis, have an emergency, which leads them into psychiatry in the first place.
I mean, I think this is nothing really new. This is something which, many people have been trying to do for many, many years. And in some cases they've done this in some places. But we sort of lost the way, particularly over the last couple of years, with emphasis on things that we have to do from the top down. I'm talking about organisations, which has taken away, and I know this because I'm talking about the health service, because I used to be a chief executive, so I know from that perspective, it's taken away the innovation from people because of the way the system now is impeding on, what you've got to do. So a lot of mental health professionals want to do these type of things, but they're impeded from doing it because of the system. So that's why, in terms of, it's not really changing the system in terms of the more communities, it's changing the system in terms of what's imposed on people that they've got to do. And every time we do a series of learning sets with different groups of people, and time again, the thing that really stops people doing some of this work is actually the system they're working in. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem in terms of
Is that something, have mean, that is a huge hurdle, as you've indicated, and it's something we've talked about endlessly about. Could something be done to lobby the government and say, I mean, we've done it locally, we've spoken to the MP and said, would it be possible for the purposes of this pilot, if nothing else, which is going to be a small pilot, would it be possible to allow workers from different agencies to produce their own targets and predicted out, you know, the way they measure and evaluate the outcomes, and sort of get some agreement around that. And Robert Buckland, MP, said he spoke to Norman Lamb, and it sounded as if in principle he was agreeable to that. I don't know, have you tried anything like that?
We can talk about
We tried it with the shadow Minister of Health and didn't get very far. I won't mention his name.
we've been successful to
Because they're all
in
politics and
Wales.
politics.
We've been doing
Sorry?
quite in Wales.
Politics.
Following the conference, we had more involvement with mental health, public health in the Welsh Government, and we have a meeting next week. Is it next week or the week after? With Welsh Government, and looking at how we can introduce the programmes that we've been introducing in certain authorities throughout Wales. And it's seen as a way of introducing the new Welsh measure, which is a very good piece of legislation. So there is an opportunity, you know, it's in one country, but we've been able to influence the government there. And it was just by exposing them to the experiences that professionals and service users have had in that conference, and that's what triggered it off.
But also there's a wider debate, there's about localisation.
Yeah.
I mean, there's that debate, there's the whole thing about more self-determination for regions, so the whole idea is to bring it down. And for me, the well-being centre, if we take...
Those systems aren't yet ready to be fully integrated, but if there's a willingness from across those different agencies to nudge in the right direction and put some of those building blocks in place, then over the longer term, it'll get to there. But actually there's what's happening amongst the agencies and support services, and what's happening locally that sort of helps join in that overarching strategy. And is that right? Am I understanding what Plymouth is at?
No, it's a clarity. It's a clarity of what the the vision of what should happen. But the clarity is owned by all these community groups in terms of what the long-term objectives and aims are. But on the journey, as you say, there are lots of things just by the nature of people getting together, and discussing it and coming up with ideas can be done. Not big things, not big things in the sense of perhaps, what some people may think of as important, which they are, of course, but the small little things that can be done by individuals, by groups, or in terms of trying to change a bit about, big organisations. And, people can do that. It's people that can do that bring about those changes, not, not, mechanical things.
I think, Andrew's quite right. I think, we've started, listening to residents, and now they're going to form their own residents association. And as I say, having this room, that bit on the chart where it showed the community getting bigger, that's really what we want to develop, support the people if they want that, to develop that bit. And I think that's maybe what you're talking about, actually get down and do something within the community that the residents can see of benefit to them fairly quickly. But alongside that, and parallel with that, you could be doing other things behind the scenes around the actual agencies and workers and all of the strategies and whatever needs to be done. But I think you're right. I think it's really important that people actually see that they live in a community where they could contribute, where things can change, where they can really perhaps, as Derek Monto was saying, as a voice, if they decided that they wanted a particular thing, then collectively there's more strength in the voice of the community than there would be with one individual. And so once that's determined what that is, then you've got much more chance of getting it. So I do think it's important in the short term to, you know, get sort of lots of small things that will make a difference to people, so that otherwise they're not going to engage.
But also it's to identify what good practices are already occurring in, you know, between the, you know, and to sort of, in a way, you know, recognise those things, the good things which are happening, but celebrate them. You know, because very often people are struggling as individuals in the system, you know, doing good work, but they're not getting recognised for it. You know, they're up against the, you know, the system. So, you know, if a group, wider group, can see, well, you know, that's something that we should really recognise and celebrate. It gives people much more, you know, motivation for, because very often, you know, the whole thing is sort of, you know, the whole system is down on people to, you know.
What I was just going to say is that listening to Kate's got saying £30,000 is not a lot of money. Well, of course, not a lot of money to set up some big system or whatever. But in terms of the front line, that kind of money can do enormous good, because so much of what you want to do in the community is stopped because you don't have £5 to do this or £20 to do something else. So to utilise, I mean, we found that out in West Swindon when we had a very small budget. What we could do with it was incredible. It enabled people to get involved and to do things. So get hold of the money and let's use it.
The focus should not just be on that.
I think it enables things to change
Exactly.
and to happen.
I mean, it used to be years ago that there was, you know, pockets of money that could be used for multi-purposes. You know, but it seems to have disappeared.
£10,000 a little while ago when we worked together changed an entire new town in terms of group work, community support, self-help group, etc. And we didn't tap into the main services hardly at all, because it all happened in West Swindon. And it was a tiny budget compared with £30,000 here. We're struggling to pay the rent for a room for one day a week. That would make an enormous difference to relationships and people working together. And that's what moves things. The people working together and relationships.
Yeah. I was just going to say the money that was spoken about, they received 900,000 from the government, which was going to be distributed between 6 areas of Swindon.
Right.
Of course, because of the relationship inside the council, Eldeen have lost out on that money. They were supposed to have 150,000 to operate the fabric of the area, and basically that's disappeared. So the money that was spoken about is actually a particular budget, which I don't imagine would be tapped into for this type.
It's probably going. I should think all the money has gone.
Yeah, essentially, because this is very important in part of the process of actually working out what is the context, because, I mean, that's gone, but where are we now? And I was talking to the council before we left, and they were saying, well, where do people congregate? Well, some of them do use the community centre, but it's run down. Morrison's has been open, and a lot of people go to Morrison's, you know, so that's a congregation space, but we lost the opportunity for putting something there. There's the church, you know, there's the primary school. You know, so where is it that people congregate already, and what are those parts of the community doing to create more coherence and cohesion? But the thing I was just picking up on something that John was saying about looking at other projects. And I'm aware that there are already wellbeing centres which are operating in different parts of the world. And when I came across, there was a whole life kind of community network. Now, what they didn't do is that they eventually ended up with a hub, but it didn't stop them starting. The fact they didn't have a building, they became a network. And what they did is that the assumption was we didn't need workers and people who use the service, but we are all members of something and we contribute to it. So people came in, and some people had skills that they could offer about running groups like Zumba or Tai Chi or whatever, but whatever it was, they managed to organise events under the umbrella of the idea of the network in different places, which sounds similar to the thing you did.
That's the sort of thing that we're hoping.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's once a week, and
But there was one key other thing they did, which is actually it wasn't one group of people working for another. We all undergo life problems and distress and struggle at times. So everybody became a peer. So there was no differentiation between we are the super copers and you are the people who need to learn to cope like us. It was like we're all on the same sort of basis. So that created a kind of democracy. And then maybe some people are in more extreme circumstances than others, but it was all part of a continuity and continuum. And that changed the assumptions and the basis of where people felt they were when they belonged to this group.
And that's about the partnership relationship. rather
Absolutely.
than the,
You know, we're not providing a service for you. This isn't a day centre. This isn't a community centre where, you know, it's our place. But that's subtle, and it's, you know, to work through how you do that. It just doesn't happen. It's something that you work towards. It's a process.
It's going to. I mean, we haven't really started with that aspect
Mm.
of it, and it's going to take time. And
Mhm.
as you say, it's about finding out. You know, if somebody is good at art and they would like to share that expertise, they can be the volunteer that runs the art or helps support the art group. Or it doesn't matter what it is really, but yes.
Some of the most effective things that I've been involved with recently over the last few years, and it have been around the dementia supportive communities, where that has developed community support without any resources really, and very few. I mean, and that was okay because that was looking at one particular group of people. But one of the areas that I'm working with now, they've moved on from that, and they're looking at how they can move this dementia supportive approach for the community into a more people supportive approach, and that's a really very good model and way of working. And it engaged it really did engage the community, and again the resources, very very small amounts of resources.
We've been very impressed with the community in LD, the people that live here and work, but the people who came, I don't know, I think you're probably the one, there were about 40 of us in the room, and at the beginning people were sort of, what's this about, you know, what am I going to be expected to do? There was a bit of sort of, bit of caution, and then it got going, and most of us, I think most of us were at that, and there was huge enthusiasm. I don't know, Sonia, you were there, and it was good, wasn't it? People were sort of quite, I think everybody more or less engaged and said what they could do to contribute. And so we'll build on that once we get this bit going.
And belonging has its own benefit, doesn't it? Because a human need is to belong somewhere.
Yes. So I think, does anybody want to say anything else before we break for coffee? Or anybody with anything about the first session that, yes? Harry?
Yeah, there's two things, serious one and then the facetious one. Unfortunately I can't stay all day, I've got a home visit to go to. I think you can just take as read that you've got my own personal support, whatever influence I've got. You've got my own personal support and what any influence can bring from AWP. I was really pleased that you highlighted about the assessment, not just the negatives, but you know, I work with a lot of staff that don't want to be spending 2.5 hours after they see every patient on the computer with just 2 fingers. So the will to do it differently is there. And the facetious one, you talked about where do people in Swindon go? Well, there is only one place, the county ground, when we're top of the table. So you've got to make sure that is our major hub. That's me. It's me, and I drag my kids along.